Savitri and Satyavan, a divine relationship. Sri Aurobindo's epic poem, Savitri, is a priceless treasure. When we read Savitri, we receive the gifts of the Spirit. Sri Aurobindo wrote Savitri on many levels. Each time we read it, we receive new teaching and more consciousness. We open Savitri and we start to read. We find something beautiful, something mystic and transforming. Then we open Savitri again to the same place, and lo and behold, another priceless treasure emerges from the same words that we read before. We read a little farther on, and more wonderful gifts come to us. We can read on, we can reread again and again, and lo, each time Sri Aurobindo brings us more spiritual gifts of consciousness, of wisdom, of love, of light. The story of the divine relationship of Savitri and Satyavan is the story of the divine relationship between man and woman. It is filled with priceless treasures for the reader. It brings us many stories in one. At first glance, we see a heartwarming story of love, the story of a young girl, Savitri, a beautiful princess. She journeys through the world, searching for that special man who will be her husband. She finds Satyavan, a handsome prince living in the deep forest. When they see each other, it takes only one look to know that they belong together. After they speak with one another for a while, he offers her his hand in marriage. She accepts him, and they embrace. Their beings unite in love. Savitri has found her husband, and they marry for a lifetime of love. In his author's note at the beginning of the book, Sri Aurobindo tells us that the characters in Savitri are incarnations or emanations of living and conscious forces. He says they take human bodies in order to help man, to show him the way to a divine consciousness and immortal life. He says that we can enter into concrete touch with them. Therefore, the story of the divine relationship of Savitri and Satyavan shows us divinity that can help us. It also shows us that we too can have a divine relationship. When we read about Savitri's journey to find her husband, we discover the story of the divine destiny, which is part of every divine relationship. The title of the first canto of Book 5 in Savitri is the Book of Love, and it is the destined meeting place. The first lines of poetry are words of fate, telling us, but now the destined spot and hour were close, unknowing she had neared her nameless goal. For though a dress of blind and devious chance is laid upon the work of all-wise fate, our acts interpret an omniscient force that dwells in the compelling stuff of things, and nothing happens in the cosmic play but at its time and in its foreseen place. Although Savitri does not know when she will find her destined mate, Sri Aurobindo tells us that her soul is guiding her. It gives her the sense of divine destiny on her journey. Her soul has the memory of her past lives and past destinies. Savitri is also guided by her higher self above her, which has the higher consciousness of the divine. Sri Aurobindo writes, even her motion's purpose was not new. Traveler to a prefigured high event, she seemed to her remembering witness soul to trace a journey often made. Upon her silent heights, she was aware of a calm presence seated above her brows, who saw the goal and chose each fateful curve. It used the body for its pedestal. The eyes that wandered were its searchlight fires. The hands that held the reins were its living tools. All was the working of an ancient plan, a way proposed by an unerring guide. Driven from within, she followed her long road. As we begin Canto 2 in the Book of Love, we learn that the day on which Savitri met Satyavan was a destined day of fate that she never forgot. This was the first day of the entirely new and destined life for Savitri, the life and the work for which she was born. Sri Aurobindo writes, all she remembered on this day of fate. Here first she met on the uncertain earth the one for whom her heart had come so far. In the nameless light of two approaching eyes, a swift and fated turning of her days appeared and stretched to a gleam of unknown worlds. As the story of Savitri and Satyavan's meeting unfolds, we come upon the spiritual treasure of a beautiful divine mystery of the eternal soul, the fact that we have an eternal soul mate. Another divine aspect of Savitri and Satyavan's relationship is that they are eternal soulmates, twin souls brought forth from the Supreme by the Divine Mother. This relationship reflects the first subtle manifestation of world energy brought by the divine force that moves everything in the creation. It shows us the real power of Savitri's and Satyavan's divine relationship. In Book 2, the book of the Traveler of the Worlds, Savitri's father, King Ashwapati, enters the world soul in search of the Divine Mother. Just before he sees her for the first time, he sees the deathless two-in-one, which she has brought forth from the unknowable. Sri Aurobindo writes, approaching through a stillness dumb and calm to the source of all things human and divine, there he beheld, in their mighty unions poised, the figure of the deathless two-in-one, a single being in two bodies clasped, a diarchy of two united souls, seated, absorbed in deep creative joy, their trance of bliss sustained the mobile world. The story of Savitri's destined meeting with Satyavan in the forest glade is the story of two eternal soulmates who find each other again in this life after having been together for many lifetimes. It is something that has happened before, a journey often made. When Savitri first sees Satyavan, she recognizes him as her eternal mate. Sri Aurobindo writes, for suddenly her heart looked out at him, the passionate seeing used thought cannot match, and knew one closer than its own close strings. Her inner vision, still remembering, knew a forehead that wore a crown of all her past, two eyes, her constant and eternal stars, comrade and sovereign eyes that claimed her soul, lids known through many lives, large frames of love. Sri Aurobindo explains this beautiful divine relationship. He tells us how Savitri and Satyavan recognize each other. On the dumb bosom of this oblivious globe, although as unknown beings we seem to meet, our lives are not aliens, nor as strangers join, moved to each other by a causeless force. The soul can recognize its answering soul across dividing time, and on life's roads, absorbed, rapt traveler, turning, it recovers familiar splendors in an unknown face. These knew each other, though in forms thus strange. Although to sight unknown, though life and mind had altered to hold a new significance, these bodies summed the drift of numberless births, and the spirit to the spirit was the same. Satyavan declares his soul's knowledge of Savitri by telling her, Even a brief nearness has reshaped my life, for now I know that all I lived and was moved towards this moment of my heart's rebirth. I look back on the meaning of myself, a soul made ready on earth's soil for thee. We receive more wisdom when Satyavan tells Savitri about himself and his life and his sadhana. This is the teaching about the divine relationship between couples when the relationship is not merely soul-based but spiritual, and the woman is the man's Shakti, the power for his life's work. When Satyavan tells Savitri what she will bring to him, we see that he knows she is his Shakti, another divine aspect of their relationship. Before his retirement, during some of the evening talks he had with a few disciples, Sri Aurobindo spoke of the true spiritual relationship between a man and a woman. He spoke first of the psychic union. He uses the word psychic to mean the individual soul. This is the word used to speak of the individual soul in all his teachings. Then he spoke of the spiritual union. He said, there is a meeting together of the psychic of the man and of the woman, a union of soul to soul. In the higher life, there are two types, two gradations of meeting of man and woman. One is the psychic union, the other is the spiritual. For a psychically developed man, to get a woman of the right type is rather difficult. Even when the union of the psychic takes place between them, the other parts, the mental, the vital, and the physical of one, may clash with the other, and the gain of the psychic being may be spoiled by this disharmony. But if the psychic being dominates in both, then these difficulties may slowly clear up. The spiritual relationship between man and woman is the most difficult to achieve. The man seeking the higher life, the seeker after divine consciousness and truth, who is the Purusha, if he meets the woman of the right type, the woman who is his Shakti, then his spiritual life, the life which he is to manifest, is enriched and becomes full. In this case also, there is the psychic union between the two. In the case of those who have the psychic union of the proper kind to start with, the spiritual union may gradually develop and manifest itself. In the case of the spiritual union, the woman who is the Shakti must be really a power, that is to say, a powerful personality who can help the man and who can receive the help from the Purusha in the proper way. Each must be of real help to the other. This relation is the most difficult to attain. These difficulties come to the sadhak. To the siddha, the perfected soul, there is no difficulty. He knows fully well what is to be manifested. If his Shakti is there, he knows where she is, and he will get her. The Shakti is not necessary for the supramental yoga. Without the Shakti, full knowledge, consciousness, power, and ananda can be attained. But if these elements are to be brought to and manifested in life, then the Shakti is necessary. If there's no Shakti, then he cannot bring down the knowledge, power, ananda, etc., that are in him into life. He can, in that case, only prepare the way for the work to be done at a future time. Sri Aurobindo spoke of his own relationship with Mother, and he said that Mother was his Shakti. He said, in my own case, it was a necessary condition for the work I had to do. If I had to do my own transformation, or give a new yoga or a new ideal to a select few people who came in my personal contact, I could have done that without having any Shakti. But for the work that I had to do, it was necessary that the two sides must come together. By the coming together of the Mother and myself, certain conditions are created which make it easy for you, the sadhaks, to achieve the transformation. You can take advantage of those conditions. Sri Aurobindo said that with the Mother's help, he covered 10 years of sadhana in 1 year. Both Sri Aurobindo and Mother always said that they had the same consciousness, and that they were one being in 2 bodies. This is the truth of having a soulmate. In a letter of 1934, Sri Aurobindo wrote, "The Mother's consciousness and mine are the same, the one consciousness in 2, because that is necessary for the play. Nothing can be done without her knowledge and force, without her consciousness. If anybody really feels her consciousness, he should know that I am there behind it. And if he feels me, it is the same with hers." In 1933, somebody wrote, "Is there any difference in your working and the Mother's working? I mean, any difference in the force and effectivity?" Sri Aurobindo answered, "No, it is a single power." Satyavan expresses this divine relationship in the things he tells to Savitri about himself. Satyavan is a serious sadhak and a perfected man, a siddha. He is seeking for the way to bring his realizations and his attainments into manifestation. We see that when he looks for the first time at Savitri, as Sri Aurobindo said, he knows fully well what is to be manifested. He knows that she is his Shakti, and he does everything he can to get her. We see both Satyavan the sadhak and Satyavan the siddha in the things he says. While Savitri becomes conscious of their past together, Satyavan becomes conscious of their future together. Sri Aurobindo writes, "He met in her regard his future's gaze. This golden figure, given to his grasp, hid in its breast the key to all his aims." Satyavan tells Savitri about growing up in the deep forest. He describes how he became the sadhak, searching for the divine. He tells her that he had a glimpse of the presence of the One in All, but he did not find the transcendent power in his physical matter. He says that his spirit was saved, but his body was not yet conscious. Then he tells her how she will help him to the full realization and to attain his final goal of a physically conscious body. This is one of the final goals of Sri Aurobindo's yoga. He says, "But thou hast come, and all will surely change. I shall feel the world mother in thy golden limbs, and hear her wisdom in thy sacred voice. The child of the void shall be reborn in God. My matter shall evade the inconscious trance. My body, like my spirit, shall be free. It shall escape from death and ignorance." Satyavan tells Savitri that he searched for the full truth, but he could not live it. Now her coming has changed everything. She will help him to realize his highest aims, which are the highest aims of Sri Aurobindo's yoga. Gold is the color of the supramental consciousness, and Satyavan sees gold coming to him from Savitri. He says, "I looked upon the world and missed the self, and when I found the self, I lost the world. My other selves I lost, and the body of God, the link of the finite with the infinite, the bridge between the appearance and the truth, the mystic aim for which the world was made, the human sense of immortality. But now the gold link comes to me with thy feet, and his gold sun has shone on me from thy face." As Satyavan gazes upon his eternal soulmate for the first time in this life, he is not aware of their divine relationship from the past, like Savitri is, but deep within himself, he recognizes her. He tells her that her voice has awakened his heart to an unknown bliss, and more than earth speaks to him from her soul and when she looks at him. But Satyavan wants Savitri to be a mortal woman, not a divine being, so she can end her journey and come to live with him. As Sri Aurobindo said, he can feel that she has the power to be of real help to him. Even though they have been together for only a few moments, he does not hesitate to speak words of love and longing. Satyavan is divinely inspired. In his very first speech to Savitri, he is already speaking of marriage, a nuptial union. He describes the life they will have together, and he says, "Close is my father's creepered hermitage. There let me lead thee into an opulent life. Bare, simple is the sylvan hermit life, yet it is clad with the jewelry of earth. Wild winds run, visitors midst the swaying tops. Through calm days, heaven's sentinels of peace, couched on a purple robe of sky above, look down on a rich secrecy and hush, and the chambered nuptial waters chant within." Savitri does not have to say very much. She knows it all. When Satyavan proposes to her, all she has to say is, "O Satyavan, I have heard thee, and I know that thou, and only thou, art he." When Satyavan tells Savitri of his aspirations for the realization of the highest in his body, in his daily life, and how it comes to him with her, we begin to get a glimpse of the great teaching which contains all treasures, the truth of the Supreme, the all-consciousness, who is the unmanifest and the manifestation, and his Shakti, his power of creation, and the creation itself. The divine relationship of love between Savitri and Satyavan is the human expression of the divine love between the Supreme and his Shakti, the Divine Mother. Sri Aurobindo describes this in the Book of Beginnings, in Book 1, Canto 4, The Secret Knowledge. The relationship of Savitri and Satyavan is a divine relationship on every level. Their union is the human reflection on a daily basis of the divine relationship between the Supreme Lord and his Supreme Shakti. This is the true source and the activity and the goal of the divine union of Savitri and Satyavan throughout their relationship. The relationship of the Supreme and his Shakti, the Divine Mother, is a key realization when we practice Sri Aurobindo's yoga. Therefore, it is something to realize for all who want to work for full consciousness. The explanation of the secret knowledge is in the yoga of Savitri's father, King Ashwapati. In order to understand its importance, in order to realize what it means in the divine relationship of Savitri and Satyavan, in order to know what it means for us in our own yoga practice, we have some of the things that Sri Aurobindo wrote about the secret knowledge in Book 1, Canto 4. He tells us so beautifully that everything is only the Supreme and his Shakti, his power of creation. He writes, "This whole wide world is only he and she. This is the knot that ties together the stars. The two who are one are the secret of all power. The two who are one are the might and right in things. He speaks of the Supreme, and he explains how his Shakti, the Divine Mother, came to be. The Absolute, the Perfect, the Alone, has called out of the silence his mute force, where she lay in the featureless and formless hush, guarding from time, by her immobile sleep, the ineffable puissance of his solitude. The Supreme acts in our world as himself for the Divine Mother to do her work for him. Sri Aurobindo writes, "All here, where each thing seems its lonely self, are figures of the sole transcendent one. Only by him they are. His breath is their life. An unseen presence molds the oblivious clay. One came upon this dubious whirling globe to hide from her pursuit in force and form. He is the substance, he the self of things. She has forged from him her works of might. She wraps him in the magic of her moods and makes of his myriad truths her countless dreams." In Indian philosophy, the Supreme is the male principle. He is embodied in men. His Shakti is the female principle, and she is embodied in women. In describing the divine relationship between the Supreme and his Shakti, Sri Aurobindo shows us the essence of this divine relationship. We can understand that human love has its eternal form in the relationship between the Supreme and his Shakti. This is the essence of the divine relationship between Savitri and Satyavan. The beautiful marriage of Savitri and Satyavan takes place when they meet for the first time. They go through something private and personal before they go through a traditional marriage ceremony. Each culture has forms of marriage to bind together two people who will be husband and wife. There is a ceremony, and people often make vows to each other in the presence of others. This helps them to keep their vows because other people hear them. It also gives their family and friends the opportunity to share this sacred moment in their lives. But the inner beings of the couple begin to unite before the formal marriage ceremony. Sri Aurobindo describes the true sacred marriage union when he writes about how Satyavan and Savitri unite in their first meeting. In Savitri, he describes it as all happening at once. But when there is a real marriage of two people, it can also happen over a longer period of time as their inner beings continue to merge until they become one. This inner unity is the true marriage, the divine marriage. In the beautiful uniting of Savitri and Satyavan at their first meeting in this life, Sri Aurobindo shows us the divinity of the relationship between them. He also gives us the wisdom to understand ourselves and to understand our own relationships. Soon after they meet for the first time, Satyavan proposes to Savitri and she accepts it. Then Savitri weaves a simple garland out of the forest wildflowers. She places it on Satyavan's bosom and she bows to touch his feet in worship. This is the living expression of the truth that for her, he is the embodiment and the living symbol of the Supreme, and her whole being belongs to him. Then Satyavan takes her in his arms, in the living expression of his acceptance of all of Savitri's being as part of his own self, a living expression of the divine Shakti as part of the Supreme. Their union is for a lifetime of the delight together in the essence of each other's soul. Our soul is our individual portion of the highest, the all-love, which is everything, and by which everything manifests. Sri Aurobindo teaches that the essence of our soul is the Ananda aspect of the full Sat Chit Ananda consciousness, which is existence, consciousness, and bliss. Our soul is all love and light and delight. Sri Aurobindo writes about the divine marriage union of Savitri and Satyavan in words used for becoming one with God. He speaks of mortality becoming eternal and the finite becoming infinite to show us the divinity in a true union between a man and a woman. Starting with Savitri, he writes, as if inclined before some gracious God, who out of his mist of greatness shone to fill with beauty his adorers' hours, she bowed and touched his feet with worshipping hands. She made her life his world for him to tread, and made her body the room of his delight, her beating heart a remembrancer of bliss. He bent to her and took into his own their married yearning joined like folded hopes, as if a whole rich world suddenly possessed, wedded to all he had been, became himself, an inexhaustible joy made his alone. He gathered all Savitri into his clasp. Around her, his embrace became the sign of a locked closeness through slow, intimate years, the first sweet summary of delight to come, one brevity intense of all long life. In a wide moment, as of two souls that meet, she felt her being flow into him, as in waves a river pours into a mighty sea. As when a soul is merging into God, to live in him forever and know his joy, her consciousness grew aware of him alone, and all her separate self was lost in his. As when a starry heaven encircles happy earth, he shut her into himself in a circle of bliss, and shut the world into himself and her. A boundless isolation made them one. He was aware of her enveloping him, and let her penetrate his very soul, as is a world by the world's spirit filled, as a mortal wakes into eternity, as the finite opens to the infinite. To further tell us that Savitri and Satyavan have the divine relationship of the Supreme and the Supreme Shakti, and that this is the truth of the marriage union, Sri Aurobindo writes, the wedding of the eternal Lord and spouse took place again on earth in human forms. In a new act of the drama of the world, the united two began a greater age. Love's twain had joined together and grew one. The natural miracle was wrought once more. In the immutable ideal world, one human moment was eternal made. There is another divine aspect of the relationship of Savitri and Satyavan, another priceless treasure of wisdom and truth for all mankind. It is the Divine Mother's purpose for taking birth as Savitri. It is the work she came to do for all humanity. Sri Aurobindo writes in one of his letters that Savitri is represented in the poem as an incarnation of the Divine Mother. She is the incarnation of the Divine Mother who came to conquer death for the soul of man. In his author's note at the beginning of the book, Sri Aurobindo writes that Satyavan represents the soul carrying the divine truth within itself, but descended into the grip of death and ignorance. Savitri is the divine word, the daughter of the sun, the goddess of the supreme truth, who comes down and is born to save. Savitri prepared herself to conquer death in order to save her beloved husband and soulmate, the soul in death and ignorance. She wants to bring him back to life so that both of them can continue to do their destined work in the world. Together, they will go on serving the divine's highest purposes of the evolution of man's consciousness into the divine consciousness. Sri Aurobindo teaches that we all have this destiny. We get our first indications of Savitri as the Divine Mother in Book 1, Canto 1. Sri Aurobindo describes her as she awakens on the morning of Satyavan's fated death. As part of his description, he writes, "In her there was the anguish of the gods imprisoned in our transient human mold, the deathless conquered by the death of things. To live with grief, to confront death on her road, the mortal's lot became the immortal's share, the Godhead greater by a human fate." In Book 1, Canto 2, we read about the magnitude and the difficulty of the Divine Mother's great work as Savitri. Sri Aurobindo writes, "For this she had accepted mortal breath. To wrestle with the shadow she had come, and must confront the riddle of man's birth and life's brief struggle in dumb matter's night. To win or lose the godlike game for man, whether to bear with ignorance and death, or hew the ways of immortality, was her soul's issue, thrown with destiny's dice. A conscious frame was here, a self-born force, a work she had to do, a word to speak. A force in her that toiled since the world was made, accomplishing in life the great world plan, pursuing after death immortal aims, repugned to admit frustration's barren role, forfeit the meaning of her birth in time, obey the government of the casual fact, or yield her destiny up to passing chance. In her own self she found her high recourse. She matched with the iron law her sovereign right. Her single will opposed the cosmic rule. To stay the wheels of doom, this greatness rose." The Divine Mother came to incarnate as Savitri because King Ashwapati sought her help. He believed that mankind was not evolving fast enough. When he found her, he begged her to incarnate on earth to help mankind. The Divine Mother responded to his plea with a promise that there will be help for mankind to make the progress to immortality from its present state of mortality. The Divine Mother is the supreme force for evolution. She incarnates for this purpose again and again, down through the ages. When the Divine Mother is born as King Ashwapati's daughter, Sri Aurobindo writes, "One had returned anew from the transcendent plains, and bore anew the load of mortal breath, who had striven of old with our darkness and our pain. She took again her divine unfinished task. Survivor of death and the aeonic years, once more with her fathomless heart, she fronted time. Again the mystic deep attempt began, the daring wager of the cosmic game." The most direct statements of Savitri's incarnation and her divine work are at the end of Book 10, when Death challenges Savitri to reveal who she really is. Death says, Who then art thou, hiding in human guise? Thy voice carries the sound of infinity. Knowledge is with thee. Truth speaks through thy words. The light of things beyond shines in thy eyes. But where is thy strength to conquer time and death? O human claimant to immortality, reveal thy power. Lay bare thy spirit's force. Then will I give back to thee Satyavan. Or if the mighty mother is with thee, show me her face, that I may worship her. Let deathless eyes look into the eyes of death. In imperishable force, touching brute things, transform earth's dead into immortal life. Then can thy dead return to thee and live. This is the culmination of Savitri's divine work to conquer death. Now she will reveal herself completely. She knows exactly what death is, and she knows death's eternal source. She speaks both to death's present form and to his real truth. Through Savitri, the Divine Mother tells death that he is her instrument, and that he should remain her instrument for some time. But she commands death to release Satyavan, so their divine relationship can continue in divine service on earth. A mighty transformation comes on Savitri. Sri Aurobindo writes, in a flaming moment of apocalypse, the incarnation thrust aside its veil. A little figure in eternity, yet stood and seemed the eternal's very house, as if the world's center was her very soul, and all wide space was but its outer robe. Eternity looked into the eyes of death, and darkness saw God's living reality. Then a voice was heard that seemed the stillness itself, or the low, calm utterance of infinity when it speaks to the silence in the heart of sleep. I hail thee, almighty and victorious death, thou grandiose darkness of the infinite. Thou art my shadow and my instrument. Live, death, a while, be my instrument. But now, O timeless mightiness, stand aside and leave the path of my incarnate force. Relieve the radiant God from thy black mask. Release the soul of the world called Satyavan, freed from thy clutch of pain and ignorance, that he might stand master of life and fate, man's representative in the house of God, the maid of wisdom and the spouse of light, the eternal bridegroom of the eternal bride. Death stays true to his fixed nature and his unchanging work, and he refuses. Death resists the Divine Mother, but her will prevails. Death's darkness perishes in light, and he runs away. Then everything changes around Satyavan and Savitri. They are no longer in the darkness of death's domain. They are in the abode of the Supreme. Darkness is gone. They are in the splendor and bliss of God's everlasting day. Savitri looks at the Supreme, and she knows him as the one whom her soul had faced as death and night. The Supreme offers to Savitri the opportunity to stay with Satyavan in his domain of everlasting bliss. But she chooses to do the Supreme's work on earth. Savitri knows that she and Satyavan belong in the world, doing their divine work together. She says, O besetter of man's soul with life and death, and the world's pleasure and pain, and day and night, tempting his heart with the far lure of heaven, testing his strength with the close touch of hell. I climb not to thy everlasting day, even as I have shunned thy eternal night. To me, who turn not from thy terrestrial way, give back the other self my nature asks. I know that I can lift man's soul to God. I know that he can bring the immortal down. The Supreme says that earth nature and man's nature are not yet ready to rise. He tells Savitri to withdraw into her luminous self, or to return to her original might as the World Mother and the eternal bride of the Supreme. But Savitri wants to do the high task for which she and Satyavan took birth. She says, "In vain thou temptest with solitary bliss two spirits saved out of a suffering world, my soul and his, indissolubly linked in the one task for which our lives were born, to raise the world to God in deathless light, to bring God down to the world on earth we came, to change the earthly life to life divine. I keep my will to save the world and man." We see the divine relationship of Savitri and Satyavan again when the Supreme agrees to send them back to earth to do their destined work there. The Supreme tells Savitri that her will is one with his divine will. Her work will be his divine work. She will achieve everything as the Supreme does his marvelous works in her and through her. Savitri asks the Supreme to give her his peace, his calm, his oneness, his energy, his joy, and his love to bring back for earth and men. The Supreme grants Savitri's request. He sends both Savitri and Satyavan back to earth to live out their divine relationship and their divine destiny, and to do their divine work together. He says, "O beautiful body of the incarnate Word, thy thoughts are mine. I have spoken with thy voice. My will is thine. What thou choosest, I choose. All thou hast asked, I give to earth and men." The Supreme tells Savitri and Satyavan how he has made their destiny. He says, "O Satyavan, O luminous Savitri, I sent you forth of old beneath the stars, a dual power of God in an ignorant world. You are my force at work to uplift earth's fate. Myself that moves up the immense incline between the extremes of the Spirit's night and day. He is my soul that climbs from the nescient night through life and mind and supernature's vast to my supernal light of timelessness and my eternity hid in moving time and my boundlessness cut by the curve of space." Then the Supreme returns Savitri and Satyavan to earth. As Savitri sinks down through the heavens, she cradles the soul of her beloved Satyavan close to her heart. She awakens in the forest, lying under a tree, holding Satyavan, who is sleeping on her breast. When she awakens him, he tells her that he was traveling in strange worlds, and he was aware of her spirit pursuing him. He says that together they disdained the gates of night, and he turned away from the celestial joy of heaven because without her they were not enough for him. This experience has made their relationship even more divine. Savitri tells her beloved, "All now is changed, yet all is still the same. Lo, we have looked upon the face of God. Our life has opened with divinity. We have borne identity with the Supreme and known His meaning in our mortal lives. Our love has grown greater by that mighty touch and learned its heavenly significance. Yet nothing is lost of mortal love's delight." Then the two eternal soulmates embrace in the bliss of their divine oneness. Sri Aurobindo writes, "So for a while they stood entwined, their kiss and passion-tranced embrace, a meeting point in their commingling spirits, one forever, two-souled, two-bodied, for the joys of time." Savitri and Satyavan will now serve the divine in their life together in the world, and their relationship will become even more divine as they continue to evolve in immortal love, the divine purpose of evolution.